ethics, we're talking about how we behave towards the world, right? And so the question really is like, are we justifying misconduct, our own behavior? Because if we are even asking the question, is this ethical? Is maybe because we already know that it's not. Otherwise, we wouldn't be asking it. And maybe some people don't ask it, and that's okay. Maybe they have a easier life. But I think as a group, as a collective, obviously this question arises over and over again, whether we're talking about farming of animals, whether we're talking about farming of plants. And so the fact that the question is actually there is because fundamentally we have an issue with our behavior. And to me, I am vegan, and I have eaten the animals, then not animals, but just as a vegetarian. Then I moved on to a vegan diet just because my body decided so. and then what I understood for myself is that actually the main issue, and the main reason why I had an ethical issue with eating animals was because of my lack of awareness of how this animal arrived to me. And the fact that, and my mom still, we were talking about it this morning, afternoon, in a different session. My mom still thinks that salami is not an animal. And I'm like, I don't eat meat. And it's like, yeah, but this is salami. It's like, okay, then I don't eat salami. But that's exactly the point. It's like salami is not an animal. So I don't have any need to worry about what the story is behind this. But when you actually concern yourself for, when you really tune in with this body and you're really interested to know, who are you? What is this? What are you made of? And I think as a scientist, ultimately, the only question that we are all asking is like, what is this? Life, whatever. And so, the closest place that I found for myself, personally, is via the conversation via food. It's like, okay, I take this other and I get it in here, and that other is making this, basically.
Right.
So even the concept of like, I'm a human being is like, well, how much of this is actually plant material? Really, mostly, because I only eat plants. So, and so the question is like this transmutation of one organism into the other, which, well, suggests that actually we have, the entire system is very porous and very mutable and volatile. And but also like then even more reason to be not only respectful and appreciative of the fact that this other is gonna make your body next, because your body is being rebuilt all the time, but also like well, then you want to make sure that what you put in here is actually clean and good and happy in a way. So you don't want to have to eat an animal that is been through horror and suffering, because in a way that's what you're eating.
Yeah.
And the same would be true for plants. So it's not so much whether you're eating meat or not. Actually, I wouldn't call it whether you're eating the animal or whether you're eating the plant, or both. It's more like, do you actually know what you're eating? And if you don't, then start thinking about it.
That was awesome.
So I think we're just about out of time, but I did want to take a couple of questions from the audience. So
I was wondering, much of what all of you mentioned has to do with collaboration, and collaboration being as a trait for intelligence. Now, is that collaboration affected by the harshness of an environment? For example, the flock of birds, if they were in a super comfortable position, would they still collaborate?
Ooh, that's a
Well,
very interesting question.
When we talk about the flock of birds, or actually a lot of these flocks in schools, is predominant way to explain how they form. It's because they were responding to predation. You can actually create a mathematical model where the only pressure you put is predation, they will evolve this schooling and flocking behaviors. So the question whether if you relax that pressure, they will go back to live by themselves, it's possible because there's a lot of cost of living in groups, right? You have to compete for your food with people around you. You have to compete for the mates that are around you. You have to compete for space. There's a lot of disadvantages like infanticides in certain animal societies, etc. I mean, we see it like nepotism is a form of that in the human societies where we try to advantage or take advantage of the system for our kids.
But there are advantages.
There are advantages, but the question in
so
this
if you can't find
system,
the food by yourself, and you need somebody else to find it.
So the question is, if that's predation that's only driving the system, then yes, this system will probably go back to being solitary. But then there are things also when you've reached this point where you live together, and that's in the case of in the ants, for instance, you reach this point where the advantage is when you pass that sort of like evolutionary hump. Behind the hump, there's like so many advantages that you can actually the original pressure can disappear, and then you never go back. I mean, that's what like E.O. Wilson probably or
yeah. Well, I just did a book on societies and where they come from and what causes them to come together and fall apart. And societies as groups with distinct memberships, those are extremely rare in nature. Most 99% of the species are alone all the time or just temporarily social when they need to be. So this is actually a tough hurdle, but as you say, once you get there, you can conquer the world. We in ourselves are societies because our own bodies are consisting of cells that are totally in collaboration to get something done. So we are the most successful societies, all these large organisms that are around. The actual insects and all the other large creatures that we see mostly are loners. So.
And I guess, sorry if I might add, it depends really, like we've been talking about time scales, but it also really depends where is the scale of the question. So ultimately, like, you know, this entire place is based on primarily collaboration, and competition is as important though. So competition creates that noise that is required to create the variability that allows for the system to be dynamic, and then it finds places where it can collaborate. Our bodies are a good example, and places where things don't collaborate very well. And in some situation, when that collaboration breaks down, as we know in our body, cancer does that very well, then it can kill everything. But actually, life seems not to just die off like that. So maybe the two forces are working together, but I would say that collaboration is very important. Beyond just like, you know, oh, there is it's advantageous because when you are collaborating as a group, you can survive better as a, you know, from a predator.
Leaving the population level, collaboration is also the perceived collaboration is really important. The mycorrhizal networks and our microbiome. We're not just human here, right? Yeah. And so there are a lot of functions and a lot of, shall we say, niche space that's being fulfilled not by us, but by other organisms in our bodies. And is that a perception or is that a reality? Do the bacteria want our brains to get bigger? For instance, just to put it in a very stark way.
I think it also gets back to heterogeneity and individual differences. So if we're all going to be able to do the same thing, then maybe we don't need to collaborate. But if we are different and we have different expertise, then it makes a lot of sense.
You know, like ants with a super specialized kind of.
Right, which emerges as their colonies get bigger and bigger and things get more and more complex. That's when it becomes interesting. That's when they become more and more sort of, the parallels become more and more interesting with us.
So there's selection pressure towards a job.
Not necessarily. There are ants with huge colonies where everyone is pretty much the same, but they're not very interesting socially to study. But these leafcutter ants are among the most extreme, and as I said, you can tell what they do by their size, just as you can tell what people do by whether they're wearing the hard hat and have the lunch pail or looking like a lawyer or whatever. In ants, it's size and shape. I'm just looking like I should be in the jungle. Ironically, where I should be. So.
Well, I think we have to wrap it up now, and I want to thank everybody for coming. It's been great.
you.